June 15, 1944. The air hung heavy with salt and fear as dawn broke over the western Pacific. The USS Kidd, Fletcher-class destroyer, rolled gently in the swells off the coast of Saipan. Through the pre-dawn haze, the jagged silhouette of Mount Tapochau loomed against the crimson sky, a sentinel guarding the Japanese stronghold in the Mariana Islands. Crouched behind the forward gun mount, Petty Officer First Class Marcus Gaines steadied his breathing. His weathered hands, steady as stone despite the tension, gripped the stock of his Springfield M1 Nano 3 sniper rifle, a weapon he'd kept meticulously clean through 15 months of Pacific warfare. 3 minutes to bombardment, crackled the voice over the ship's intercom. Gaines nodded to Lieutenant Commander Harry Moore, the Kidd's executive officer, who studied the shoreline through brass binoculars. Behind them, the massive 16-inch guns of the USS New Mexico and USS Tennessee trained toward the island's western coast, ready to unleash hell upon the Japanese defenses. "There it is," Moore whispered, pointing toward a concealed depression along the ridgeline. Shore battery just where intelligence said it would be, well camouflaged, been hitting our landing craft for 2 days. "Cost us 47 Marines yesterday alone." Gaines's dark eyes narrowed as he peered through his scope at the distant shoreline. The battery, a cluster of Japanese 150mm guns that had wreaked havoc on approaching American vessels, was nestled within a network of reinforced bunkers, barely visible against the volcanic rock. "I count 7 gunners, possibly more inside the caves," Gaines said, his Alabama drawl almost imperceptible after years at sea. "Sir, if those naval guns had hit that position, the Japanese will just pull back into their tunnels and wait it out. They'll emerge once the bombardment lifts, just like they did yesterday." Moore nodded grimly. "And our boys will pay the price when they hit the beaches." Gaines lowered his rifle. "Sir, I have another idea." No one in the 21st Marine Regiment knew that one man's calculated disobedience that morning would rewrite battlefield history and save hundreds of American lives in one of the Pacific War's most critical invasions. Marcus Gaines was born into humidity and hardship on August 12, 1922, in the small farming community of Tuskegee, Alabama. The grandson of former slaves, Gaines grew up amid the fields of his father's modest tenant farm where cotton and corn stretched toward the horizon. His father, Elijah Gaines, had returned from service in World War I with a French commendation for bravery and a firm belief that education would be his children's salvation. "My daddy could shoot the eye out of a squirrel at 300 yards, Gaines would later tell his fellow Marines. Said he learned it from his daddy, who learned it during slavery days when bringing home meat meant survival. By age 7, young Marcus could consistently hit tin cans from 50 yards with his father's old .22 rifle. By 12, he was providing most of the family's meat through hunting. His mother, Coraline, a school teacher who'd graduated from Tuskegee Institute, insisted he balance his outdoor skills with academic discipline. At night, after long days helping his father in the fields, Marcus would read by kerosene lamp, history books, adventure tales, and military accounts being his favorites. "I was particularly fascinated by the sharpshooters of the Civil War," Gaines later wrote in his personal journal. "The way a single man with skill and patience could change the course of a battle struck me as almost mythical. I never imagined I'd one day put those same principles to use halfway around the world." In 1940, at 18 years old, Gaines left Alabama to live with his uncle in Philadelphia, seeking industrial work and escape from the suffocating racial climate of the Jim Crow South. He found employment at the Philadelphia Naval Shipyard, where his mechanical aptitude quickly earned him a reputation as a skilled machinist. When Pearl Harbor was attacked in December 1941, Gaines, like thousands of other young Americans, felt the immediate call to service. "The country might not have treated us as equals," he would later say, "but it was still our country to defend." The Navy recruiter looked at his test scores and mechanical background and offered immediate enlistment. But the Marine Corps, which had historically barred African Americans from service, had just opened its ranks following President Roosevelt's Executive Order A802, which prohibited racial discrimination in the national defense industry. Something about the Corps' reputation for discipline and elite fighting prowess called Gaines. His decision raised eyebrows. The Marine Corps' integration was brand new, untested, and fraught with institutional resistance. When he arrived at the segregated boot camp at Montford Point, North Carolina, in June 1942, Gaines found himself among the first generation of black Marines, men who would eventually become known as the Montford Point Marines. "They tried to break us in ways they never tried with white recruits," recalled James Ferguson, who trained alongside Gaines. "But Marcus had this quiet determination. While some of us fought the system with anger, he fought it with excellence. No matter what they threw at him, he mastered it, especially on the rifle range." Gaines qualified as an expert marksman within his first week of firearms training, catching the attention of Captain Richard Peterson, the White Range officer who had competed in national shooting championships before the war. Peterson began working with Gaines after hours, recognizing exceptional talent regardless of skin color. "That boy could put 5 rounds in a circle the size of a dime from 500 yards, Peterson would later tell a war correspondent. "In 30 years of competitive shooting, I'd never seen natural talent like that." When his fellow recruits struggled with the rigors of Marine training, Gaines offered quiet support and additional coaching on the rifle range. He became a silent leader, earning respect through competence rather than confrontation. By graduation, his shooting scores had broken every record at Montford Point. The standard path for black Marines in 1943 was assignment to segregated depot and ammunition companies, relegated to loading and unloading supplies and ammunition, vital but non-combat roles. Gaines received orders to the 18th Marine Depot Company, stationed at Camp Lejeune. But fate intervened when he was temporarily assigned to guard duty aboard the USS Kidd during a training exercise off the Carolina coast. The destroyer had just completed its shakedown cruise and was conducting gunnery exercises when Japanese submarine activity was reported nearby. Commander Alan Roby, the Kidd's captain, ordered enhanced watchkeeping, and Gaines was assigned to a lookout position with his exceptional vision and attention to detail. During the night watch, Gaines spotted the faint wake of what appeared to be a periscope in the ship's path. His alert allowed the Kidd to take evasive action and drop depth charges at the exact coordinates he'd indicated. The following morning, oil slicks and debris confirmed a successful engagement. Impressed by the young Marine's vigilance and precision, Commander Roby requested Gaines's permanent assignment to the Kidd as part of the ship's Marine detachment, an unusual posting for a black Marine at that time. The request moved slowly through bureaucratic channels until Admiral Chester Nimitz, reviewing Pacific Fleet personnel allocations, personally approved the transfer, noting simply, "Talent and courage know no color." Approved. By October 1943, Gaines had joined the crew of the Kidd as it sailed for the Pacific Theater. His integration into the ship's company was not without challenges. Some sailors, particularly those from southern states, resisted the presence of a black Marine in their midst. Others, however, simply judged him by his abilities. "First time I saw him shoot," recalled gunner's mate Douglas Ridge, "he picked off 5 floating targets at extreme range during a firing exercise. After that, his color seemed a whole lot less important to most of the boys." Gaines found acceptance in his demonstrated skill, becoming an unofficial shooting instructor for the ship's defense teams, as the Kidd escorted aircraft carriers toward Wake Island and Rabaul. His first taste of combat came in November 1943, when the destroyer came under air attack while rescuing downed pilots from the carrier Essex. As Japanese dive bombers targeted the stationary vessel, Gaines positioned himself on the deck with his rifle, picking off pilots through their cockpit canopies with remarkable precision. The Kidd's after-action report credited him with 3 confirmed aircraft shot down, an almost unheard-of feat for a single rifleman against fast-moving planes. By the time the Kidd supported the Gilbert Islands invasion at Tarawa that November, Gaines had become an integrated part of the crew. The pirate's emblem, painted on the ship's smokestack, seemed to capture something of his own spirit, disciplined but unconventional, lethal but principled. When Commander Roby spotted 15 Japanese bombers approaching the fleet on November 24th, it was Gaines who shot down 2 enemy aircraft with his rifle from the pitching deck of the destroyer. In the Marshall Islands campaign that followed, Gaines continued to distinguish himself, contributing to the bombardment of Roy and Woja with his exceptional spotting abilities. His keen eye could detect camouflaged enemy positions that even experienced naval officers missed. His reputation grew among the crew as a man who could make the impossible shot, the calm marksman with the ever-present Springfield rifle who seemed to calculate wind, distance, and timing through some sixth sense. As the massive armada of American ships approached Saipan in June 1944, Gaines had already earned the respect of his shipmates and a growing reputation throughout the fleet. He had received no formal recognition beyond a single commendation. The military establishment wasn't prepared to publicly celebrate the achievements of a black Marine, but those who served alongside him knew his value. He had the eyes of a hawk and the patience of a saint, Lieutenant James Harrington would later write. But when he pulled that trigger, he delivered judgment with the finality of God. What no one yet knew was how that judgment would soon change the course of the battle for Saipan, redefine naval gunfire support, and save hundreds of American lives on one blood-soaked morning in the Marianas. Operation Forager, the American campaign to capture the Mariana Islands, represented a strategic pivot in the Pacific War. By June 1944, the United States had pushed westward through the Gilbert and Marshall Islands, establishing a foothold in the Central Pacific. But the Marianas, Saipan, Tinian, and Guam represented something far more significant: airfields within bombing range of the Japanese home islands. For the Japanese High Command, the defense of the Marianas was non-negotiable. Emperor Hirohito himself had declared Saipan the inner sanctum of our defense perimeter. If Saipan fell, American B-29 Super Fortress bombers could reach Tokyo, a psychological and strategic blow that Japan could not absorb. Lieutenant General Yoshitsugu Saito, commanding Japanese forces on Saipan, had transformed the 15-mile-long, 5-mile-wide island into a fortress. His force of 32,000 Japanese Army and Navy personnel had spent months constructing elaborate defensive networks, concrete bunkers, artillery positions, machine gun nests, and miles of interconnected tunnels and caves that turned the island's natural volcanic geography into a three-dimensional killing ground. The Japanese had studied American amphibious tactics from our previous landings, noted Marine Colonel Robert Cushman in his post-battle assessment. They knew we depended on naval gunfire to suppress shore defenses. They adapted by creating hardened positions that could withstand bombardment and positioning artillery to maximize casualties during the vulnerable landing phase. Among the most devastating elements of Saipan's defenses were its shore batteries, clusters of 120 and 150 guns positioned to command the western beaches where American landings would necessarily occur. These batteries were protected by reinforced concrete emplacements, carefully camouflaged and connected to ammunition bunkers via underground tunnels. When naval bombardment commenced, Japanese gunners would retreat into these tunnels, emerging to resume fire once the shelling lifted. The American invasion force was massive, approximately 127,500 military personnel aboard 535 ships, including the 2nd and 4th Marine Divisions as the initial assault force. Vice Admiral Richmond Kelly Turner commanded the Joint Expeditionary Force, with Lieutenant General Holland Howlin' Mad Smith leading the ground troops. The invasion plan called for an intensive naval bombardment beginning on June 13th, 2 days before the landing. The battleships Tennessee, California, and Maryland, along with cruisers and destroyers including the USS Kidd, would pound Japanese positions to suppress defensive fire during the approach. We delivered over 3,000 tons of explosives onto that island in the first 48 hours, recalled Captain Thomas Lamison, of the USS Tennessee, the whole shoreline seemed to vanish in smoke and flame, but when it cleared, those Japanese guns were still firing. This was the tactical problem that confounded American planners. Despite overwhelming firepower, Japanese shore batteries remained operational, protected by terrain and engineering. The greatest danger came during the critical window when naval gunfire had to be lifted to allow landing craft to approach, precisely when these batteries would emerge to savage the vulnerable vessels carrying Marines to the beach. On the morning of June 15th, D-Day for Saipan, this deadly cycle played out with brutal efficiency. The preliminary bombardment lifted at 0825, allowing the first wave of amphibious tractors carrying Marines to head for the beaches. As they approached, Japanese shore batteries opened fire, targeting the lanes where landing craft were concentrated. It was like shooting fish in a barrel, remembered Sergeant Frank Tuchovsky of the 6th Marine Regiment. Those Japanese gunners had pre-registered their weapons on the exact approach lanes. They didn't even have to aim, just fire at predetermined coordinates and watch our boys get hit. By mid-morning, the situation had become critical. One particular battery positioned on a ridgeline overlooking the blue and green landing beaches had knocked out 17 amphibious tractors, killing dozens of Marines before they could reach shore. Subsequent naval fire missions temporarily suppressed the position, but as soon as the shelling lifted, the guns would emerge and resume their deadly work. Aboard the USS Kidd, stationed just 2,000 yards offshore and providing direct fire support, Commander Harry Moore and his executive officer, Lieutenant Commander William Fraser, monitored the deteriorating situation. Intelligence from forward observers with the Marine units pinpointed the troublesome battery, but conventional naval gunfire had proven ineffective against the well-protected position. "We're just not reaching them," Fraser reported after their third fire mission targeting the ridge. "They're pulling back into caves when we commence firing, then repositioning when we're forced to lift fire for the landing waves." It was at this moment that Petty Officer Marcus Gaines, observing from his position near the bridge, approached his commanding officers with an unconventional proposal, one that would reshape the battle's opening hours and establish a new tactical approach for the Pacific campaign. The noise was overwhelming, a continuous thunder of 16-inch naval guns from the battleships offshore, punctuated by the sharp cracks of 5-inch fire from destroyers like the Kidd. The air above Saipan's western beaches had become a corridor of whistling steel and cordite. Through the cacophony, Marcus Gaines focused on the problem at hand. The troublesome Japanese shore battery had been identified, a position containing 4 150mm guns nestled in a rocky depression about 800 yards inland from the landing beaches. The guns were protected by natural rock formations and reinforced with concrete emplacements, with adjacent caves that allowed the gun crews to shelter during bombardments. Standard naval gunfire had proven ineffective. The Japanese had constructed their position with precisely this threat in mind. The battery commander had established a routine. When American shells began falling, the crews would retreat to the caves, emerging to resume fire once the bombardment lifted. "We can't physically destroy those guns with our current approach," Gaines explained to Commander Moore and Lieutenant Commander Fraser as they studied the position through binoculars from the Kidd's bridge. "But we might not need to." His proposal was audacious. Rather than attempting to obliterate the position with high explosives, Gaines suggested a precision approach. He would target the gun crews themselves during the critical moment when they emerged from their shelters to man their weapons. "One shot, one gunner," he said simply. "If we eliminate the crews, the guns become useless metal." The concept was tactically sound but practically challenging. It would require Gaines to position himself where he could maintain a clear line of sight to the battery, far closer to shore than naval doctrine permitted for a destroyer. The Kidd would need to move to within 1,000 yards of the beach, exposing herself to enemy fire while holding position steady enough for precision shooting. "That's too close," Fraser objected. "We'd be within range of their smaller caliber weapons." Standard doctrine keeps destroyers at least 3,000 yards offshore during landing operations. Commander Moore studied the shoreline, weighing the risk against the continuing loss of marine lives on the approach to the beach. The latest report indicated 28 landing craft destroyed by this single battery, with casualties mounting by the minute. Doctrine didn't anticipate this situation, Moore said finally. We're supposed to support those Marines, and right now we're failing them. He turned to Gaines. How close do you need to be? 800 yards, sir, Gaines replied without hesitation, and I'll need a stable firing platform. Moore nodded grimly. Mr. Fraser, bring us into 800 yards off that ridge. All hands to general quarters. I want maximum readiness from damage control teams. The bold decision violated naval protocol and placed the kid in significant danger. As the destroyer maneuvered closer to shore, enemy fire began to target the approaching vessel. Small-caliber rounds pinged off the hull, and several mortar rounds splashed nearby, sending geysers of seawater across the deck. Gaines positioned himself on the forecastle, using a gun mount as a stabilizing platform for his Springfield rifle. He had modified the weapon with a unertl scope, the same model used by Marine Scout snipers, and loaded match-grade ammunition he'd specially requisitioned months earlier. Give me 5 minutes of suppressing fire on that position, he requested. When it lifts, their gun crews will emerge to resume firing on the landing craft. That's when I'll take them. Moore ordered the kids' 5-inch guns to deliver a concentrated barrage on the battery position. For 5 minutes, the destroyer pounded the ridgeline with high explosive shells, creating a curtain of dust and smoke that obscured the entire area. At July 27, Moore ordered, "Cease fire." An eerie silence fell over that section of the battlefield as dust clouds slowly dissipated in the morning breeze. Through his scope, Gaines watched with unwavering focus as the Japanese position gradually became visible again. Just as predicted, a Japanese officer emerged first from the leftmost cave entrance, surveying the area to ensure the bombardment had truly ceased. Behind him came the gun crews, moving quickly to return to their positions before the next wave of American landing craft approached. Gaines controlled his breathing, 3 seconds in, 3 seconds hold, gentle exhale, and squeezed the trigger. 800 yards away, the Japanese officer collapsed. Before his body hit the ground, Gaines had already cycled the bolt and acquired his next target. What followed was an exhibition of marksmanship that would later be described by witnesses as beyond human capability. In the span of 67 seconds, Gaines fired 11 rounds. Each shot found its mark with lethal precision. Gun commanders, gunners, loaders fell in rapid succession. The remaining Japanese personnel, disoriented by the invisible threat, scrambled for cover rather than manning their weapons. "My God," Fraser whispered, observing through binoculars. "He's picking them off like targets on a range." The effect on the Japanese position was immediate and decisive. With their trained gun crews eliminated, the battery fell silent. The next wave of Marine landing craft approached the beach, unopposed by the heavy guns that had wreaked such havoc earlier. Lieutenant Colonel James Stewart, commanding the 2nd Battalion, 8th Marines, would later report, at approximately 0930, the enemy battery that had been devastating our landing waves simply vanished. One moment it was inflicting heavy casualties, the next it was silent. This unexplained development allowed us to land our reserve companies intact, changing the entire dynamic of our beachhead. What Stewart couldn't know was that the battery hadn't been destroyed by conventional means. Its guns remained intact, but unmanned, its effectiveness neutralized by the extraordinary shooting of a single Marine sniper operating from the deck of the USS Kidd. As word of the successful engagement spread through the invasion fleet, Vice Admiral Turner requested details of the new fire support technique that had silenced the troublesome position. When informed that a single marksman had effectively neutralized an entire shore battery, he initially dismissed the report as battlefield exaggeration. "One man cannot change the course of a naval battle," he reportedly told his staff. But as confirmation arrived from multiple sources, including Marine forward observers, who had witnessed the shooting through their own optics, Turner began to reconsider his assessment. Within hours, he would issue a directive that would fundamentally alter naval gunfire support doctrine for the remainder of the Pacific Campaign. The immediate aftermath of Gaines's extraordinary marksmanship transformed the battle for the western beaches of Saipan. With the most troublesome shore battery neutralized, the flow of Marines onto the beachhead accelerated. The 2nd and 4th Marine Divisions established a foothold and began pushing inland against fierce Japanese resistance. Aboard the Kidd, Commander Moore immediately recognized the significance of what had transpired. While the ship resumed its primary mission of naval gunfire support, he drafted a detailed after-action report documenting Gaines's achievement and the tactical innovation it represented. Traditional doctrine dictates the use of overwhelming firepower to destroy enemy positions, Moore wrote. Today, we demonstrated that precision fire properly applied can achieve the same tactical result with significantly less expenditure of ammunition and reduced collateral damage to terrain features we will subsequently need to traverse. Moore's report, transmitted to Task Force Command that evening, included a recommendation for Gaines to receive the Navy Cross, the nation's second highest award for valor. The recommendation acknowledged both the extraordinary skill displayed and the courage required to remain exposed on the destroyer's deck while under enemy fire. Vice Admiral Turner, reviewing the growing evidence of the shore battery's neutralization by a single marksman, grasped the tactical implications immediately. By morning of June 16th, he had issued a fleet-wide directive that would be known informally as the Gaines Protocol, a modification to naval gunfire support doctrine that incorporated precision shooting against enemy personnel during the critical transition between bombardment and landing operations. Where enemy positions cannot be neutralized by conventional naval gunfire due to protective features, consideration should be given to the employment of specialized marksmen operating from supporting vessels, the directive stated. This technique has proven highly effective against enemy gun crews during their transition from protected positions to operational status. For Gaines himself, the hours following his remarkable achievement brought both recognition and a new assignment. By nightfall on D-Day, he had been summoned to the flag bridge of the USS Rocky Mount, Admiral Turner's command ship. "I didn't believe it at first," Turner told him directly. "One man, one rifle, against a shore battery. But the evidence is irrefutable. What you did saved hundreds of Marine lives today." The Admiral then outlined a new role. Gaines would train a cadre of naval and Marine personnel in the advanced marksmanship techniques he had employed, creating specialized teams to support future landings. Starting immediately, he would work with selected personnel from ships throughout the Fifth Fleet, developing what would become known as Naval Combat Marksmanship Teams. While this new assignment recognized Gaines's exceptional ability, it also reflected the military's awkward handling of a racially charged situation. Turner and his staff understood that formally decorating an African-American Marine for such a visible achievement would create political complications in the still segregated armed forces. Creating a new assignment that acknowledged his expertise while removing him from the spotlight represented a compromise between recognition and the prevailing racial attitudes of 1944 America. Gaines himself harbored no illusions about the situation. "They want my skills, but not my story," he would later write in his personal journal. "I understand the calculation. The mission matters more than medals." For the remainder of the Saipan operation, Gaines trained selected personnel from various ships in advanced marksmanship techniques, creating the first generation of what would later become the Navy's combat marksmanship program. His students, a mix of white Marines and Navy personnel, applied his methods during the ongoing battle, targeting Japanese officers and crew-served weapons with precision fire from supporting vessels. The effect on Japanese tactics was profound. Enemy commanders quickly noted the new American capability to eliminate key personnel with long-range precision fire. Japanese after-action reports recovered after the war revealed increasing concern about invisible snipers operating from offshore vessels, a threat they had neither anticipated nor developed countermeasures against. As the battle for Saipan ground toward its bloody conclusion in early July, the overall impact of Gaines's innovation became increasingly clear. The specially trained marksmen he had instructed accounted for the elimination of 17 crew-served weapons positions and approximately 78 enemy personnel in command roles, a disproportionate tactical impact from a small number of specialized shooters. Marine Major General Clifton Cates, commanding the 4th Marine Division, noted in his battle assessment, "The addition of precision shooting capabilities from supporting vessels represents a significant force multiplier. Their ability to eliminate specific threats, particularly enemy leadership and crew-served weapons, has demonstrably reduced casualties among our assault forces." By the time Saipan was declared secure on July 9th, the tactical approach Gaines had pioneered had become standard practice within the Fifth Fleet. What had begun as an improvised response to a specific threat had evolved into doctrine, a new dimension of American naval combat power that would be applied throughout the remainder of the Pacific Campaign. The shore battery that had vanished under Gaines's marksmanship became a case study at the Naval War College, included in revised training materials as an example of asymmetric application of force, how a single, properly trained individual could achieve effects traditionally requiring massed firepower. For Gaines personally, the battle's conclusion brought complex emotions. His achievement had saved countless Marine lives and altered naval combat doctrine, yet official recognition remained elusive. The Navy Cross recommendation submitted by Commander Moore was downgraded to a Bronze Star, still a significant decoration, but not commensurate with the extraordinary nature of his achievement. The citation accompanying the medal made no mention of his race, instead noting simply that Petty Officer First Class Marcus Gaines had displayed exceptional skill in the performance of his duties, contributing materially to the success of landing operations. The deliberate understatement reflected the military's discomfort with elevating an African American to hero status in the still segregated armed forces of 1944. Gaines accepted the muted recognition with the same quiet dignity that had characterized his service. When a young white officer apologetically explained the political realities that had limited his formal recognition, Gaines reportedly replied, "Sir, I didn't do it for medals, I did it for the Marines on those beaches." As the American war machine moved on to Tinian and Guam, the lessons of Saipan, including the Gaines Protocol, went with it. The specialized marksmanship teams he had trained continued to operate, their effectiveness growing as techniques were refined and equipment improved. The story of how a single black Marine sniper had made a shore battery vanish became part of naval folklore, told and retold in wardrooms and enlisted quarters throughout the Pacific Fleet, gaining embellishments with each telling while the man at its center continued his work with characteristic modesty. The war moved relentlessly westward through 1944 and into 1945. The Marianas Campaign concluded with American victories on Tinian and Guam, followed by the bloody battles of Peleliu, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa. Throughout these operations, the specialized marksmanship teams, established by Marcus Gaines, continued to operate, becoming an integrated element of American amphibious doctrine. Gaines himself served as the program's chief instructor, rotating between various command ships to train new personnel as casualties and rotations thinned the ranks of his original teams. His reputation grew within military circles, though his name remained largely unknown to the American public. In February 1945, during the battle for Iwo Jima, Gaines received a field promotion to Chief Petty Officer, recognition of his expanded responsibilities and growing influence on naval combat operations. The promotion came with a personal note from Admiral Chester Nimitz, acknowledging that your innovations have saved countless American lives and measurably shortened our path to victory. By war's end, Gaines had trained more than 300 specialized marksmen and personally participated in operations at Saipan, Tinian, Guam, Peleliu, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa. The teams he developed were credited with eliminating over 1,000 enemy personnel in leadership or specialized roles, an outsized strategic impact from a program that had begun with a single, inspired act on the deck of the USS Kidd. When Japan surrendered in August 1945, Gaines was serving aboard the USS Missouri as part of Admiral William Halsey's Third Fleet. Though not present on deck during the formal surrender ceremony on September 2nd, he watched from a nearby position as history unfolded, a fitting vantage point for a man whose war had been defined by careful observation and precise action from positions just outside the spotlight. With the war's end came difficult choices. The rapid demobilization of American forces included the dissolution of many specialized units, including the marksmanship teams Gaines had established. More significantly, the integration of the armed forces that had begun as a wartime necessity faced uncertain prospects in peacetime. Gaines received offers to remain in service, including a position as a marksmanship instructor at the newly established Marine Corps training facility at Quantico. The role would have made him one of the first Black Marines to serve in a formal instructional capacity, breaking another racial barrier. After careful consideration, however, he chose to return to civilian life. His decision was influenced partly by the continuing racial realities of post-war America and partly by a desire to build something for himself after years of service. "I've served my country," he wrote to Commander Moore, who had maintained correspondence throughout the war. "Now I need to serve my family and my community." In January 1946, Chief Petty Officer Marcus Gaines received his honorable discharge at the Great Lakes Naval Station in Illinois. His service record included the Bronze Star, Purple Heart, for wounds received at Okinawa, and numerous campaign medals, an impressive but incomplete reflection of his true contribution to the war effort. Like many returning veterans, Gaines sought education under the newly established GI Bill. He enrolled at Howard University in Washington, D.C., studying mechanical engineering, a field that utilized the same principles of physics and precision that had made him an extraordinary marksman. While at Howard, he met Eleanor Washington, a mathematics student whose father had served in the all-black 761st Tank Battalion in Europe. They married in 1948, beginning a partnership that would span 5 decades and produce 3 children. After graduating in 1950, Gaines accepted a position with the Bureau of Standards, later the National Institute of Standards and Technology, becoming one of its first Black engineers. His work focused on precision measurement technologies, an application of his natural gifts in a scientific context. Over a 30-year career, he contributed to numerous advancements in calibration equipment and measurement standards, holding 7 patents for his innovations. Throughout the post-war years, the vanishing shore battery incident remained largely unknown outside naval circles. Occasional references appeared in specialized military publications, and the technique Gaines had pioneered became part of standard naval special warfare training. But his name faded from these accounts as the years passed, becoming simply a Marine marksman or a naval sniper. This historical erasure was partly due to the military's discomfort with racial narratives, and partly due to Gaines's own reticence about his wartime experiences. Like many veterans, he spoke little about the war to his family, focusing instead on building a peaceful future. In 1954, a brief revival of interest occurred when the Navy revised its combat marksmanship program. The revision committee, reviewing historical precedents, uncovered the original reports from Saipan and sought Gaines's input as the program's founder. He provided technical advice but declined invitations for publicity, telling the committee chairman, "The technique matters more than the man behind it." The true scale of Gaines's wartime contributions began to emerge only in the 1970s, as military historians reassessed the Pacific Campaign with the benefit of newly declassified documents. and expanding cultural interest in the contributions of black service members. Naval historian Robert Sherrod, researching a comprehensive account of amphibious operations in the Pacific, uncovered the original after-action reports from Saipan, including Commander Moore's detailed account of the shore battery incident. Sherrod tracked down both Moore and Gaines for interviews, resulting in the first substantive public account of the event in his 1975 book, Uncommon Valor: Special Operations in the Pacific War. Sherrod's account brought Gaines a measure of belated recognition. In 1978, during a ceremony marking the Navy's adoption of a new sniper training protocol, Gaines received a long-delayed commendation from the Secretary of the Navy, acknowledging his pioneering contributions to naval combat marksmanship and special operations. The commendation noted that the specialized teams he had established during the war had become the precursors to modern naval special warfare units, including elements of what would later become the SEAL teams. His technical innovations, particularly in the areas of range estimation and windage calculation, remained part of naval sniper training into the 21st century. More meaningful to Gaines than formal recognition was the gradual acknowledgement of African American contributions to the war effort. The story of the Montford Point Marines gained increasing public attention, culminating in the award of the Congressional Gold Medal to the surviving members in 2012, recognition that Gaines did not live to see, having passed away in November 2001 at the age of 79. In his final years, Gaines occasionally spoke to military historians and at veterans events, providing first-hand accounts that helped preserve the record of black service members' contributions. When asked about the limited recognition he had received during the war, he would typically respond with characteristic perspective. "Wars aren't won by medals and citations," he told an interviewer in 1996. "They're won by ordinary people doing extraordinary things when the moment demands it, then going home to build the peace they fought for. That's what I did. That's what thousands of others did. The difference is just that some stories get told and others don't." The shore battery that vanished under his marksmanship on June 15, 1944, became more than a tactical victory. It became a metaphor for the unseen contributions of countless black Americans whose service to their country often went unrecognized, but whose impact was nonetheless profound and lasting. Today, naval special warfare training still includes study of the Saipan Protocol, the technique of eliminating enemy personnel through precision fire from naval platforms during the critical phase between bombardment and landing. Few of the young sailors who learn these techniques know the name of Marcus Gaines or understand how his singular act of skill and courage on the deck of the USS Kidd established a tactical approach that continues to shape modern naval operations. Perhaps the most fitting testament to Gaines's legacy came not from military recognition, but from the Marines whose lives he saved that June morning on Saipan. In 1984, at a reunion of the 2nd Marine Division, several veterans who had landed on the beaches that day sought him out, having finally learned the full story of why the devastating shore battery had suddenly fallen silent during their approach to the island. "You've been living in my borrowed time for 40 years, one former Marine sergeant told him, grasping his hand. "I wouldn't have made it off that beach if that battery had kept firing. My children, my grandchildren, they all exist because of what you did that day." Gaines reportedly replied with the simple humility that had characterized his service. "We all did what we could with what we had. I just had a rifle and a clear line of sight." The story of Marcus Gaines reminds us that history is shaped not only by those whose names dominate the headlines, but also by those who serve with quiet excellence from positions just outside our field of vision. It compels us to look beyond the standard narratives of war and peace to find the fuller truth of how battles are won and societies transformed. Would you have had the courage to stand exposed on the deck of a destroyer under enemy fire? The steady hand to make impossible shots across pitching seas, the modesty to accept limited recognition for extraordinary achievement. Would you have broken doctrine to achieve victory when conventional approaches failed? Would you have served a country that didn't fully recognize your humanity, believing that your actions could help it become more worthy of your sacrifice? These are the questions that the story of Marcus Gaines and the vanishing shore battery leave us to contemplate. Questions as relevant today as they were on that fateful morning off the coast of Saipan in June 1944. Share this story so others may remember what courage truly means, not just in the moment of battle, but in the quiet dignity with which we face both triumph and injustice, contributing our best to a world that may not always recognize the value of what we give.